And regular listeners will know that your book, How to Get a Job You Love, was one of my recommendations in episode 14 of a book that every graduate should read. And today we're going to explore that further and dive into the topic of how to get a job you love. There are lots of books out there that are great if you have a clear idea of what you want to do, but not so many that are useful for people who are fresh out of uni and are having issues with the question of where do I start and how do I begin my career. So starting at the beginning, where would you recommend, and I know it's not an easy question, but where would you recommend people start if they really don't know where to start?
I think great question. I think fresh graduates face difficulties on all fronts because you've got to learn how to undertake an effective job search. If you get anywhere near an organisation, they really pretty much expect you to hit the ground running in terms of doing the job. And then you've got the added puzzle of, well, how do I choose? Because 4 or 5 generations ago, school leavers chose from anything between about 6 and 15 jobs. Now we're choosing from tens of thousands. So where do you start? One of the important things is to really understand what experience you've already got, and for 2 reasons. One is just to get some grip on what are you interested in, what kind of things do you do well, even if it's in embryonic form, what skills have you got? And so that you can also learn to talk about those fairly quickly. The other thing is to say, well, how are you actually going to filter down the tens of thousands of possibilities to something like 5 or 6 active choices? And strangely enough, the answer is always about conversations. So if you talk to people at that point in their career and say, well, how did you discover, how did you make a breakthrough, how did you actually learn enough so that you were a credible candidate for the job, they'll usually say, well, I actually reached out to people and I had some great conversations. And one of the great mysteries at the moment is why graduates are not using their alumni networks to any real extent, because that's one of the ways you can reach people. But there are lots of others too. So I could just backtrack on that. The thing about talking to people that graduates really misunderstand is that it isn't about exerting influence or saying, can you get me in somewhere, or can you apply a bit of leverage to get me interviewed. That's not the most important outcome. The most important outcome is using any kind of connections to track down people who appear to be doing interesting jobs and getting to talk to them. Because that's the fundamental raw material that you need to validate your own ideas about what career possibilities are out there. There are other things you can do as well beyond that, but I guess that's probably a good initial answer to your question.
And you talked there about people knowing what they're good at. Because often, in my experience, people underplay some of the things that they are good at. What's a way for people to begin to understand what their skills are?
Well, you can interrogate any kind of work experience, and I do look at a lot of graduate CVs. Although we don't work with that many graduates, I do get invited often on a favours basis to look at graduate CVs or go to graduate job fairs. And the thing about a graduate CV is it tends to be very, very heavy on academic information. Now, it's not irrelevant, but it's not the most important message as far as an employer is concerned. An employer is looking for skills. Now, that's the first step. The second step is they're not just looking for skills, but they're looking for how you apply those skills. So if you've got any kind of work experience, paid or unpaid, then what you're really trying to get across is what did you learn, what value did you add to the job, if you changed something about the job, what did you do, if you learned how to operate a particular process or get hold of a system and really understand it, or to provide customer service. I mean, of course, the interesting thing is graduates are, a fairly inventive population, and even in holiday jobs, what they tend to do is to reinvent things or to delight the customer by doing something slightly different. And they never put that in their CV because they're not quite sure how to say it, and also it sounds like bragging. And perhaps we'll talk about bragging in a second, but that's the thing. It's not so much understanding what I'm good at. It's making that connection that says, how do I then translate that and communicate it in a way that an employer is likely to find interesting.
So you talked about the importance of having conversations with people.
Mm.
Do you think this needs to be direct in reaching out to people, say, via LinkedIn or Twitter and trying to have conversations that way, or more face-to-face and speaking to just their more formal network and friends and family?
Okay, well, let's unpack that, because some people are perfectly capable of making fairly cold approaches, even to people they're not close to. Most people aren't, so that the graduates are always going to get better traction in the marketplace, even by the most gentle form of networking. But they're, of course, because they lack the experience of how to approach people and what to say about themselves, they're often the most reluctant to do it. The advice is always to keep it as easy as possible. So even so often you get really good results through friends of parents and family of friends and people you've worked with and people you've studied with. Alumni networks are slightly different because that's all almost pre-contracted. I'm part of an alumni network, which essentially means if somebody rings me and says, I studied at the same place you did, can I have half an hour of your time? I'm honor bound to say yes. So you can go quite cold in that process. But generally, what's not going to work for most people is kind of picking the name of somebody senior at an organisation and trying to ring them cold or email them cold. And even using LinkedIn is an interesting one, because people then, what they tend to do is make an electronic connection to somebody, and it really is much better to pick up the phone. And that answers the bit of your question about should it be face-to-face. Well, the answer is yes. Why? Because you learn 1,000% more, literally. You remembered, you build a relationship, you pick up a lot more of the insider language of what an organisation is looking for. You get a chance to talk a bit more about yourself and what kind of what you're interested in. So we make the mistake of thinking this is all about kind of electronic connections and building up followers on Twitter and all that kind of thing. But it isn't. It is actually about building productive relationships. And you do that best by sitting in front of people.
No, I completely agree. And what's even worse on LinkedIn is when people try and connect with you but can't even be bothered to change the automated message.
Yes.
So you just get the hello, insert name.
Yeah, I know.
Please join my connection.
I always say, well, where have our paths crossed? How do you know me? And it's most people never reply, or they do and they say, well, I've just fallen across you on LinkedIn. Well, that's not strong enough, is it? So, yeah, value reason why people should connect to you. Yeah.
It makes you feel very special in that situation. Yeah. It's interesting you talked there about networking, because I know it's only recently I've been reading more, and you do, when you speak to people, you do understand more the power of networking. But thinking back to myself as a graduate, and just generally the networking word just had a sort of dirty connotation.
Oh, it's dreadful. It's absolutely dreadful. So people like me, what we tend to do is to start by saying, well, you're interested in moving to this sector. How do you think that's going to work for you? How do you run the video backwards from the time that you get your internship or even a job offer? Run it back. From that point backwards, what are the steps you're likely to take? And most people tend to say, well, I probably do it at some stage, need to have a conversation with somebody. And that's all I'll pick up on. Telling people to network is, strangely enough, it's even true for people mid-career. It's just a nightmare scenario, because they envisage a situation where they're going to have the perfect elevator pitch. They're going to be self-projecting. They're going to be selling themselves. They're going to be, kind of making somebody back into a corner. And it's just not like that.